In 1944, some Japanese soldiers were assigned the responsibility of guarding an island named Luban. They were specifically tasked to work with the local militia, doing all they could to keep the island out of the Allied hands. The commander of this group was a soldier named Onada, and he was very good at following orders. Well, you all know, in World War II, Japan did not win. The island really wasn't guarded that well, and it fell to the Allied forces. Well, Onada, who is really good at following orders, said, well, let's follow them in a different way. And they engaged in what was called guerrilla warfare. They fled into the jungle and kept attacking the natives of the island. They attacked the troops that were on the island. They heard, but they did not believe. And they did not know that the war was over. The war didn't last much longer. The war ended, yet these troops, these 5 troops, there were just 5 of them, continued fighting long after the war was over. Onada and his troops were slowly being killed in guerrilla-style conflicts after the war was over, until it was just Onada left. He had been fighting in the jungle against that island, against the people of the island, for nearly 25 years. The war started and ended about a year after he got his assignment, so he fought for 24 years during peacetime to protect that island. A guy came out to visit him. He was a student. He was looking for this soldier, and he found him and told him that the war's over. Onada said, I am not going to leave my post until my commander dismisses me or relieves me of duty. Well, this student went and found his former commander. His former commander is now a librarian, a bookseller. And his former commander puts on his old uniform, goes out there, and officially relieves this soldier of duty 29 years after he went out there. Onada followed orders. Onada kept the faith. He did what he was supposed to. He waited, and he followed him to the best of his ability. This reminds me of a passage in Isaiah 40, 28 through 30. Listen as I read it. Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This passage begins with 2 very important questions. In my words, don't you know? Haven't you heard? Our attention should be drawn immediately by those 2 questions. It's something that we may not know. It's something that you probably haven't heard. You know, it's also something that you probably need to know. These questions specifically draw our attention to the first point the passage is making. Roman numeral 1, if you're taking notes. God is the everlasting creator. If you look at verse 28, it says, He is the everlasting God, the creator. 2 attributes of God right there. It's divided into 2 parts. First, He's everlasting. Second, He's the creator. You know, these 2 statements, they could be easily overlooked. You could be reading the book of Isaiah, the book of Genesis, and you automatically assume that God's a creator, God's everlasting, and you're just like, oh, whatever, and you keep on reading. Well, they're also taken for granted. You kind of ignore them. You kind of don't factor them into what you're reading as you're reading it. That cannot be. In this case, these 2 attributes need to be our basic presuppositions, our basic ideas we carry with us, or you carry with you as you read and as you study this passage. Understanding God is everlasting, is important. In other words, He is eternal. He doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. He exists outside of time. Time really has no impact on God at all. And we cannot even use time as a way to understand God. Because time doesn't affect God. God doesn't use time. God created time for us. Because it would be difficult for us to function without time. The whole of everything, past, present, and future, was created by God. When God looks at us, he sees every aspect of our life, past, present, and future. Everything is laid out before God. And he looks at it. I have a picture here. He looks at it. It's a nice happy stick figure here. He looks at this figure, and this is what God kind of sees. This is how simple time probably is to God. All of our life is laid out before us, and it's simple to God. We are simple when compared to God. That stick figure, that piece of paper, is all of time, and the universe is everything else. So this is where we exist, is on this piece of paper, essentially. That's really just one area of God's knowledge. And it's one area we can't fully understand. Yet God is multifaceted. In other words, God has so many more areas, and we can barely comprehend those areas as well. Taking into account the complexity of the eternality of God, or the everlasting God, the first of two attributes, the first of the two, leads into the second one. So God is everlasting, and he is also the creator. We are that piece of paper. We're created. We're controlled. We're owned by God. Everything about our existence that we can see and that we can't see is God's and controlled by God. Our understanding of this wonderful world that God has created can be pictured by that simple stick figure on that piece of paper. Yes, the world's not a piece of paper. But when we compare what we know about the world to what God knows about the world, this is the sum of our knowledge. Everything we know is written here compared to what God knows. So God is so far above us. He created every minute detail of this universe, of this world. He's so far above us in all aspects that we really can't even make a valid comparison. You know, knowing this about God makes what the verse says next a severe understatement. If we look at the rest of verse 28, the second point I'd like to bring out is God never sleeps or grows tired. That's Roman numeral 2. He never sleeps or grows tired. It says, he does not faint or grow weary. The writer of Isaiah continues with some things that we need to understand. And the first element that I just read is that he does not faint. The word fainting, it's an action. It's something that people do. Some people at the sight of blood faint. It's actually interesting to watch, but not for them. They can get seriously hurt. You know what? Fainting, passing out, that is an action that is not associated with God. It cannot happen to God. He cannot do this thing. If we see God existing out as time itself, the idea that God can faint, it's a ludicrous idea. The fact that he can faint, or that he might be able to faint, would ruin the whole picture of God. And with that idea, it makes the following description just as powerful. He cannot faint. It's an action he cannot do. He does not sleep. He does not faint or grow weary. Weary is a description, whereas fainting was an action. Verse 28 continues by noting that he does not grow weary. Weary, in other words, is a description that is not associated with God. First of all, you have an action that God cannot, does not, will not do, and now you have a description that can never be applied to God. God does not sleep, nor can anyone ever describe him as being tired. So when you take the reverse of it, you look at it, you switch it around, it says essentially that God is always awake. God is always alert. He's infinitely full of energy. You know, we see God as untiring. We see God as a having an eternal supply of energy. This rest of 28 says, the last thing in 28 says, his understanding is unsearchable. It continues the idea and going back up to his eternal idea, the eternal nature of God, the Creator. He knows everything. Studying for a few moments at 11 o'clock at night makes a person tired. Yet God has all the knowledge that ever will exist, that ever existed, and he doesn't forget any of it. And he doesn't fall asleep. That should give you comfort. And the idea of this